Welcome to this podcast. My name's Gary Callaway, and I'm really glad you joined us today. I'm going to be interviewing my good friend Pat Murphy. Now, I think we met somewhere between 1982 and 1983 at the Palo Verde nuclear station. I went to an operating crew, and Pat was already on the crew. And one of the first things I noticed about Pat was that he had a Bible on the table. And this sparked a conversation and also sparked a long running friendship. So I'm going to give the floor to Pat and say a little bit of a background. He's worked at several nuclear plants like I have, and he worked for a while at the Clinton station, and I want him to talk about the experience he had while he was there. So Pat, if you would begin by describing the man that showed up at the Clinton nuclear station.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Good to talk with you again. Um, it's interesting, the guy that showed up at the Clinton power station on February 12th, 1980, February 13th, 1980, we just celebrated Lincoln's birthday because it was in Illinois. And this was my first job after getting out of the Navy. I'd been in the Navy for 9 years. Well, 8 years, 11 months, 3 days, 2 hours, and 15 minutes.
But who's counting?
Who's counting? Anyway, I was raised as an Army brat. My dad was in the Army, and I was born in Colorado, moved from Colorado when I was 3 months old. Don't have a whole lot of recollection about that. Went to Germany, lived there for 5 years. Eventually, we found our way to Alabama. I was raised with the name of Patrick Murphy. Guess what? I was an Irish Catholic. My name is Patrick because of my birthday, born on St. Patrick's Day. As a young boy, I was very interested I wanted to become a priest. My father raised us very normal Catholic. We went to church every Sunday. We celebrated all the seasons. And until I was about 12, that was my fondest dream. In fact, one of the things that I used to do as a boy, some people were playing cowboys and Indians, others cops and robbers. I played Father Murphy in his congregation. I would take those little wafer candies and give them out to people as they knelt down as if I were giving them communion. However, once I hit puberty and discovered that there were girls out there, things changed for me. I was no longer interested in being a priest. And in fact, I started going a little bit wild. Several of my friends and I started experimenting with beer, wine, and then eventually marijuana. I graduated from high school, and this was at the time of Vietnam War. And I needed to join the Navy or join the military because I had gotten my girlfriend pregnant and couldn't afford to have a baby. So my mom suggested I join the military because they would pay for the health care. I asked my dad, retired Army officer, which branch I should join. He said, well, if you want rapid promotion, think about the Army. If you want stability, not going a lot of places, join the Air Force. If you want to learn something that'll help you out in civilian life, join the Navy. So my Army officer father talked me into joining the Navy, so I did. And went to boot camp in Orlando, Florida, and I helped with the every Sunday in boot camp, we had to go to church. Wasn't a suggestion, it was a requirement. Everybody went to church, Catholic or Protestant. I don't know about the Jews because all of us in my boot camp company were either Catholic or Protestant. So I went to the Catholic church at the chapel, and I would do the lay readings for the priest. I would read the epistle of the day and the gospel. So I was involved in that. I got out of boot camp, went to electronics technician class A school, and that was up in Great Lakes, Illinois. I went through basic electricity and electronics school, which was basic, learning about electricity and electronics. Shortly thereafter, my son was born, and shortly after that, my wife and son joined me up in Great Lakes. I continued on in ET school. It took the better part of a year before that was through. And I left Great Lakes heading to California to go to nuclear power school. I went to the USS Vancouver, which is a tank landing ship, an LPD, between ET school and nuke school. And one of the guys that was there had been a Navy nuke, and he got kicked out. Well, not kicked out, he failed out of nuclear school, and he tried to get me to try to drop out and just become a regular ET. He said, it's a wonderful life. You'll like it a lot more than being a nuke. And I said, well, I'm going to get as far as I can. I'll probably flunk out too, but I'm going to do it as far as I can. So went to nuke school, graduated, actually did very well in nuke school. Went to prototype in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and did pretty well there as well. I tried to stay as a staff instructor, but I wasn't selected for that. Instead, I went to the USS Bainbridge. However, I was changed when I was going through nuke school. I decided I'm so lucky that I don't believe those superstitions and lies that my ancestors did, trying to make up things to explain things that were unexplainable and create gods out of their own imagination. And so instead of being a good Catholic boy, I became an agnostic, and then followed shortly thereafter by proclaiming myself to be an atheist. Went to the Bainbridge and was there for several years, a little over 3 years. Went back to prototype, and debauchery probably sums up my time in the Navy up to that point. I was very, very wild. My first wife and I experimented sexually with all sorts of things, and a lot of drugs, marijuana, hash, speed, LSD. Never did heroin, but just cocaine, everything else. And I got divorced while I was there in Idaho. Things seemed to be heading in the right direction as my time in the Navy was coming to a close. I was fairly stable, still pretty staunchly atheist, but in generally, I was a pretty happy guy. Got out of the Navy and started interviewing for jobs, and received a call to go to the Zion Training Center run by Westinghouse up just north of Chicago. And I went there. I sold my house in Idaho, moved back to Albuquerque to be with my family. So I stayed there while I was looking for a nuclear job. So got the call from Zion. They invited me to come up for an interview. I said, sure. Had a real nice interview. And the guy that interviewed me said, we'll be in touch with you probably in a week or so. I said, okay. Before I moved back to Albuquerque, while I was still in Idaho trying to sell my house, I took an interview at EBR2, which was an experimental breeder reactor in Idaho Falls. One of my former shipmates, Vince Ballage, worked there, and he got my resume and he gave it to his boss. I got called from them a few days later. He invited me out to EBR2 for a job interview. I dressed real nice and wearing a tie and everything. Anyway, got the tour. Vince Ballage, my old shipmate, gave me the tour of the facility. And the guy looked at my resume, asked me a bunch of questions, and said, "You look ideal to me. You are the perfect fit. But I got to ask you, have you had any other interviews yet?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I just got interviewed by the Westinghouse Training Center in Zion, Illinois." He said, "Well, how did that go?" I said, "Pretty well." He asked if I'd gotten a job offer. I said, "No, but I'm expecting to by this Friday." And he said, "Well, thanks for your honesty. I would hire you on the spot, except for that. I am not interested in hiring you only to see you leave and go to Zion a couple days after I hire you. So I'm going to keep interviewing other people. And if I find anyone that's even qualified, I'm going to offer them the job because I've got a class starting up that I need filled right away. So appreciate your honesty, but I'm not going to hire you." Oh, wow. Okay, thanks. Shortly thereafter, I contacted Zion because they hadn't called me. And the guy said, "Well, we've got some offers out. We don't expect all of them to be taken. But I can't offer you the job until I get the results on all of those. Meanwhile, hang in there. We really liked you. We really want to hire you." I said, "Okay." Then I sold my house, went back to Albuquerque, waited. Got a call from Fermi, which is just outside of Detroit. The INC manager wanted to fly me out for an interview. I said, "Okay." So I interviewed with him, and he said, "This was great. Now, I looked at your resume. It looks like you're also qualified for operations or even operations training. Would you like to interview with them?" And remembering what happened with the guy at EBR2, I said, "No, I just want to have the interview with you." In reality, I didn't really want to be an INC tech. I wanted to be an operator or an instructor, but I didn't want to take the chance. So I flew back to Albuquerque, contacted Zion again, and the guy told me it's unprecedented, but everybody we offered accepted the position, so I don't have a job for you. I said, "Oh, well, that's interesting. Shoot." So then I got a call from Illinois Power Company in Clinton for the Clinton Power Station in Central Illinois. They flew me out, and it was a job for operations. I interviewed with them and had a pretty nice interview. The place was kind of a dump because they were out at the site. It was a construction site. It just rained, so there was mud everywhere. But I liked the guy that I interviewed with. So he said, "Thanks, we'll be in touch." A week later, I got a call from Fermi offering me the job. I also got a call from Maine Yankee asking me to come out for an interview. I got another call from Waterford down in Louisiana, and they did a phone interview and offered me the job right on the spot. But they offered less money than I was making in the Navy, so I was quickly able to decline that one. Anyway, I did get an offer from Fermi. I also got an offer from Illinois Power Company. And the Fermi job offer was a little bit more money, but it was for INC, and I really wanted to be an operator. So I took the job at Illinois Power. And then I drove out to Champaign. First I stayed in a Holiday Inn there while I was looking for an apartment. Went to work, uh, got settled in. Still looking for an apartment. I found one in Champaign. Uh, Most of the people working there uh, did not live in Champaign. They lived in uh, Bloomington Normal, or can't remember the other side. Anyway, uh, the original headquarters for the ops department was in, uh, wasn't Decatur, maybe it was. Anyway, uh, they had just recently relocated out of the site, so that was my introduction. I met somebody at the Holiday Inn, though. There was an entertainer there playing light rock with a guitar and singing. She was a very good singer. I really enjoyed, and so I went every night down to the bar listening to her sing. We got acquainted and became quite good friends. Meanwhile, I rented an apartment in Champaign. I started working there at Illinois Power, went through their basic training, quickly went through that and started writing surveillance procedures, and continued my friendship with the entertainer. Uh, and I was very much attracted to her. She seemed attracted to me. And I was trying to take our relationship to the next level, and was kind of coming on strong. And she said, "Sorry, I've given up sex for Lent." Being a raised Catholic, I knew exactly what that meant. And I said, well, that's disappointing. A few days later, she told me that her 5-year-old niece, Lori, had been diagnosed with leukemia. I said, 5 years old? Oh my goodness, that's terrible. She said, I'm going to drive out there. She was from Council Bluffs, Iowa. So she said, I'm going out to be with my family. And she said, Lori's leukemia has made my faith in God even stronger. And I said, that's ridiculous. And I'm going to prove to you that your God is just make believe. And I'm going to do it using the words of your book, the Bible. Meanwhile, go comfort your family. I'll see you when you come back. So, bold words from me, but it was based on a movie that I'd recently watched called Inherit the Wind, which was a Hollywood dramatization of the Scopes monkey trial, which featured William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow. Well, the guy portraying the Clarence Darrow character in Inherit the Wind, seemed to be as familiar as William Jennings Bryan was, who was the Christian character. And he seemed to have as much knowledge about the Bible as William Jennings Bryan. And one of the lines in the movie was from the quote reporter from the New York Times that said, you old hypocrite, you know the Bible as well as William Jennings Bryan. And Clarence Darrow was supposedly said, how can you not believe in something that you don't know anything about? So yeah, I know all about it, and I don't believe. Silly me, I thought that Inherit the Wind, the trial portion, was actually a transcript of the actual Scopes monkey trial. I found out years later that it was a fabrication, and not a very good one at that. Anyway, it gave me the line, I'm going to prove to you that the Bible is a fairy tale. So all I had to do now is get a Bible. So our secretary, a lady named Jenny Weirs, was the wife of a Presbyterian pastor in whatever that town is. Decatur, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, uh, her husband was a Presbyterian pastor, so I knew she would have access to a Bible. So I went to work on Monday and asked her, Jenny, can you give me a copy of the New Testament? I didn't tell her my nefarious reasons for wanting that, just let it at that. And she said, well, I don't have one with me, but I can bring one tomorrow. Meanwhile, I've got this other book that you might be interested in. It's called More Than a Carpenter by a guy by the name of Josh McDowell. You could read it if you wanted. I said, okay. So I took it home and I read it that night. And I don't know if any of your listeners are familiar with that, but it's a fabulous book. It caused me to have some questions, but that's about it. In there, Josh McDowell referenced another book called Who Moved the Stone by Frank Morrison, and he said this guy was an agnostic who decided that he was going to prove the resurrection of Jesus Christ was fabricated. So I thought, well, that might be an interesting book to read. So I asked, the next day I told Jenny that I read More Than a Carpenter and asked her if she had this other book, Who Moved the Stone. She said, well, actually, I've got it right here at my desk. I also brought you that New Testament. And I said, okay, I'll take both of those. Here's More Than a Carpenter. She said, you read it all? I said, well, yeah. It's not a very long book, a couple hundred pages. And so I took Who Moved the Stone and the New Testament home with me. I started reading Who Moved the Stone, and I don't know if any of you have read it, but it's very detailed in some of the flaws of the Jews regarding the trial of Jesus. Now, as a Catholic, I was familiar with the notion that Jesus was crucified, but I was not aware of the details, such as the trials. So I said, how am I supposed to know if this guy's telling the truth? I guess there's only one way to know. That's pick up the source document, the Bible. So I picked it up, and I knew enough about the Bible to know that the first 4 books of the New Testament were what are called the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I decided to start with the Gospel of John because, as a young Catholic, back in those days, I don't know if they still do it, the last part of the Catholic Mass was the first 14 verses of the Gospel of John. I remember I was an altar boy during the Latin Mass, so I was quite familiar with it. And I remember even in Latin, I loved hearing those first 14 verses of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So I said, I don't have any reason to pick any other book. So since I remembered that one, I'll start there. So I picked up the Gospel of John. It's probably 7:30, 8 o'clock, something like that. Started reading it. But before I started reading it, I took it to bed with me. Because I figured, 8 o'clock, I'll just read for a couple hours and go to sleep. So I took it to bed with me. I had a reading lamp attached to my headboard. I said, God, I don't believe in you, and you know that if you are real. But if you are real, I ask you to reveal yourself to me as I read this. I still didn't believe. I thought I was just saying words out loud, but I wanted to have that caveat out there. So I started reading, and I was pretty taken by it. I was moved. About 10 o'clock, I decided, I've got to get up at 6 o'clock, go to work. So I guess I should put this away and go to sleep. So I put it away, laid down, went to sleep, and I immediately went to sleep. 5 minutes later, I woke up, and not just awakened, I was wide awake. And I thought, well, this is stupid. This never happens. Well, I know what'll put me back to sleep. I'll read some more of that Bible. So I picked it up where I left off and started reading and continued reading. And I read all the way through the Gospel of John. I said, well, I guess I should start at the beginning of the New Testament. So I went to Matthew. Started reading Matthew and continued reading Matthew. About 6 o'clock in the morning, I said, well, if I'm going to get to work on time, I guess I better get up, take a shower, have some breakfast, go downstairs and meet my carpool. So I did that. About 6:30, I went downstairs to meet my carpool. Continued reading the Bible all the way to work because I wasn't driving. And got to work and immediately looked for Jenny. And she asked me about who moved the stone. And I said, well, I started reading it, got, several pages in, probably 50, 60 pages in. But I wasn't sure he was telling the truth about all of this. So I just put it down and just left it at that. And I saw her crestfallen, which is exactly what I was hoping for. And then I said, so I picked up the Bible, and her face lit up with joy. And she said, oh, and what did you read? And I said, John. And she said, oh, John the Gospel or the Epistle? The Gospel. And how much did you read? All of it. You read all of the Gospel of John? Yes. And then Matthew. And of course, she was stunned by this. She said, and what happened? And I said, well, I have to admit, I was quite impressed, but I don't think I'm a Christian or anything because, there was no lightning, no thunderbolts, nothing like that. So I guess I'm not a Christian. And she said, well, actually, Pat, most people don't have a lightning and thunder experience. I said, well, I expected that and didn't get it, so I don't know. And she continued to pray that day. So I went home that night, finished that, read Mark, finished Matthew, read Mark, started into Luke, and went to bed at a normal time, about 10 o'clock, and woke up, started reading some more, went to work, and I looked for Jenny. I said, well, there's no doubt about it. Jesus is God. He saved my soul. I don't know any other way to put it. And I went back to my desk, sat down, and started my work. A little while later, she came back with a typewritten piece of paper, and she said, Pat, I can't wait for you to read about the party that's going on in heaven for you today, Luke 15. And so I thanked her for that. And I did read about that party in heaven. I continued reading, decided I was just going to read all the way through the New Testament until I was done. And Friday morning, she came by my desk and asked me if I brought the New Testament with me. And I said, well, yes. She said, can I have it? And I said, well, I'm not quite finished with it yet. And she said, yeah, I know. But can I have it, please? I said, sure. So I gave it back to her. And then she presented me with a Bible from Genesis to Revelation with an inscription that he who began this good work, you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. So I had me a Bible and continued reading that Bible for many, many years I recently, and I led a lot of Bible studies over the years, took a lot of notes in that Bible, and I recently passed it on to a fairly new Christian with all those notes as I got a new study Bible. But I passed that. I didn't want to just throw it away or give it to somebody that wouldn't appreciate it. So I gave it to a new believer who is still using it to this day.
Well, that's a great story. And I couldn't imagine how I could add anything to it. I certainly don't want to take anything away from it. So I want to close with a prayer.
Let's
Father,
do that.
I thank you for Pat Murphy, for the blessing he's been in my life. And I thank you for what you did in his life. And I thank you for his honest testimony today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.